Hello, it's time for more extemporaneous gibberish. Okay, gibberish, nah, whatever. Quasi nonsense. I'm just gonna say stuff. So, I'm driving south through Ojai, and it's a nice place. I understand they have their own water table, so to say. That's cool, but they're strict. Development's difficult. Good. It should be difficult. It shouldn't be impossible, but blah blah. I don't want to do speeches. Speeches suck, and this microphone does not suck. I just basically start anywhere. It's like when you have to move house. You have to pack and you have to load the truck or whatever. I get very stuck because I always want things in optimal order. But I've basically had to, in such circumstances, come up with something like start anywhere and keep going. If it's an item, put it in a box. Yes, it's an item. Where's a box, right? So, and you just keep going like that. So there's a procedural part of me that really wants to be efficient and have things make sense, and so that when I'm unpacking later, that it'll make sense. I'll be able to find things, and so I can proceduralize things like that. Really, in fact, I have a strong inclination to proceduralize to a kind of absurd extent of kind of thinking out groupings, adjacencies, sequences. I want elaborate perfection, so that whenever I get where I'm going, it's relatively seamless, and the things almost unpack themselves and figure out how to be configured in the new dwelling, or if it's a workplace, whatever the domicile of the workplace. I know that's not the right word for a workplace, but this talk is like most of my talks, really. I start anywhere and keep going. So I like it like that. It frustrates me though, because I don't relish the idea of coming across as disorganized. It's kind of a sore spot, and I'm really not disorganized. I'm just differently organized, and I'm differently organizing because I have a lot of internal debates about what is optimal. Because what is optimal is not simply a matter of analysis with clearly understood and assumed goals, values, and priorities. Those are to some degree situational. So I have debates about that, and then sometimes I can think along the lines of, what's a compromise, let's say procedure or interim objective that punts on the issue of what's really the more important priority and kind of satisfies multiple priorities with the same process or rubric or heuristic protocol, blah blah blah. So I don't know if I'm gonna reach over and hold this thing from toppling over. It's on a small, cute little robot-like tripod dealio that I got at a camera store, Sam's Camera in Costa Mesa, actually, or Sammy's, I forget. Anyway, it's a great store, and the staff are helpful, and the products are of good quality, and it's right next to a 99-cent store. So, go figure. All right. So is that thing working? Are we running over here? I know, these are fun things. I want to take these to lens crafters and see if they can put progressives, replace these plain glass. These are costume glasses, basically. But they've got this fun stuff here. So that's kind of like it's kind of like a pilot. It's kind of like a dweeb, and it's kind of like a grandpa tourist. So it works for me. several levels, you could say. So I'm going to be driving through LA, or the LA basin, the west side of the LA basin, somewhere between 6 and 8 p.m., which is likely to suck. So I'm starting to ask myself, why is that the case? Now, here's a McDonald's. I could stop at this McDonald's. I know some McDonald's anyway have free Wi-Fi. And I could go to that McDonald's, get some nuggets, get some work done. Got my laptop, I got uploads to do, I've got business to conduct. But I think what I'm going to do is, I've left Ojai proper. I'm headed towards Ventura now. I think what I may do is stop somewhere around Camarillo or possibly Thousand Oaks. I like Thousand Oaks. I like the name. I like I like the elevation, although it's kind of hot and dry as compared to Camarillo. It's more foggy, it's more moist, it's more ocean breeze and such, or at least ocean air. But oaks, I like a good oak. I'm into oaks. Holly, less so. Mistletoe, yeah. Well, I like, the old traditional mistletoe, but except for, they never really did me any good because we never had Christmas gatherings, including non-relatives. So having mistletoe, it's really for the parents. But I've never had that tradition as an adult family man. So anyway, I don't know if it's poisonous or has thorns. We used to have a holly bush in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and at one point I think I trimmed a bunch of it out to make it more of like a tree, more of a holly tree, which is nice to do. It does have pointy leaves, and you can prick yourself on those. It's not great, but it's a nice rich green, and they're sturdy leaves, and they get those nice red, seasonal berries. So that's all good stuff. Holly berries is one of my favorite iterations of the color red, incidentally. And I can't have said that without thinking of Halle Berry, with whom I would hang out without hesitation, given the option, but it seems not likely at this point. So, I'm kind of, in a way, what I'm doing in my life now is, first of all, I want to say, I love my life. And the only way I was able to find my way here to loving my life was I had to find my way to loving my persona, myself, my psyche, my entire being. I had to do a lot of discovering, a lot of poking and prodding, and a bit of R&D, but I don't like my behavior or my sort of persona style at all times. Sometimes I irritate myself, at least as much as I'm irritating people around me, because I can be very neurotic, very pedantic, very unfun, But I've opened up so much, and I don't really want to do a ranked list of all the factors, including my own agency, which was a pretty difficult thing to liberate from the ossification of, whatever, civilizational expectations or whatever. But talk therapy helped with a psychologist. You're hard-pressed to find a psychiatrist who's really excels at talk therapy. Anyway, I would not have gotten so far so fast in my adult life from a point of a pretty severe disempowerment. Well, that's how I'm just going to say it like that. I don't want to do comparisons or have to try to prove it. I'm just going to say that I somehow got myself into a mindset of severe disempowerment. And I way through the maze or out of the, clay encased. Yeah. Oh fuck! What was that? Oh no, that was a box full of cheap rings that just hit me on the knee and then scattered on the floor under my feet. So, well, I could get stitious about it, sure. So I've just come through a mountain road with lots of twists and turns, and that box of cheap rings from Temu, a site that I find delightful. I know that the Gen Zers have warned me about the scams and whatever, but it's a lot of pretty decent quality costume type apparel, and cheap versions of drones and night vision goggles and stuff like that. So I spent a few $100s on there, and I don't regret it. It's fun, it's fun stuff. And I'm a man child, okay. So the little boy in me is part of this. You can't really empower your psyche while neglecting how many iterations or versions of your child self are still, in backup format somehow in your neurological, all those old versions of your so-called operating system of your brain, call it firing patterns or whatever. They morph and they get displaced by there's a lot of upgrades. So as you go through life, if I'm making an extended analogy to software and computers, so you got hardware, okay, you got firmware, which is like BIOS and whatnot, you can look it up, and then you have operating system level software, and then you have application level software, and probably you could have sub-application or subroutine level and blah 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 blah. But anyway, there's many theories of human function, human development, that I think are consistent with the summary that I'm giving now, along the lines of, unlike I don't really know the nuts and bolts of how software updates or firmware updates work. I think in the case of a firmware update, I'm pretty sure if you have to do that, the old version is obliterated from your device. There might be some vestiges of it in the echoes of the packets that are, the addresses are erased, but not the actual data. Who knows? But basically, it's replacing the old one. I think operating systems are more onion-like. They're more layered. I think because it's just how they are. I can tell. That's how they are. Every now and then you have a big update where it's a total wipe, but that's quite rare because it's very difficult to maintain user experience or user interface continuity if you were to try to sort of port the aesthetics and various, customized choices while completely erasing the architecture of the operating system. I think that's pretty unlikely. But of course, they're coming out with new models of phones all the time, and the ones that ship from the factory are, by and large, a fresh install of whatever they consider the latest and greatest of their operating system. So, to pivot back now to human neurology, it's not really like that. It's much more layery. There's no, so if you want to be a cyber cautious person, you might be aware of the idea of sort of actually more deleting stuff. So at least in Windows, when you delete a file, basically you're just deleting the entry in the master index of files, and it doesn't actually do anything to the file bits that are likely scattered around your hard drive. Okay. Sometimes it's a solid state drive, but wherever it is in the physical storage medium, which is of course binary digital as far as I'm aware. Well, you can get a program that's like, I forget what they call it, but it's like sort of a hardcore erase. So what that does is it basically you can pick a certain file and say like hard scrub it, and so what it will do then is you can pick all these various algorithms, some of which are military grade, or some of them are older, some of them are newer, but it essentially overwrites. So whatever spaces in the media are not don't have active allocations in whatever's the master index of file objects, that's considered space to be sort of scrubbed. And so the way this is done is with various hashing algorithms. I don't really know what that means, but I know it's a buzzword. Hashing algorithms and sort of ways of pseudo-randomizing, because computers, I'm told, aren't really capable of true randomization, but they can get pretty close, like with some sort of trick using the internal clock or something. It's like, how many nanoseconds on the clock, and I don't know how they do it, but basically it creates static. It creates like white noise of digital data and puts that on all the spots that are not officially allocated in the master index. So that way, a soft erase becomes a hard erase. And if you pick a faster, weaker algorithm, it's going to be more scattershot. So someone with a very sophisticated, diagnostic software and associated skills, it would be like it's like having a painting that you get some paint guns or shotguns, and you have a bunch of people kind of shoot a bunch of mess on top of it. That's kind of how computer erasing works. So it's faster if you do it like that. If you just say, all right, just throw a bunch of junk on the top of it, like erase it with stuff. But like if it's not like the long, tedious algorithm, there's going to be potentially recognizable patterns. So someone who knows, like a human eye, can look at a picture that's only partially obscured with graffiti, or with more of like an airbrush version of graffiti, or a paint splatter or splotch version of graffiti, and might well be able to recognize the picture, or at least some elements of the picture that were there. So experts in data recovery or forensic computer investigations, if you've done a hard erase, first of all, if you've only done a soft erase, there's a lot of stuff there that the casual user is not going to be able to find, because it becomes invisible basically, because all you've done is you've taken the address out of the address book. But someone comes and then they can easily see a lot of your stuff. Okay, and if you do a kind of a weak version of a static override, it's like the painting analogy that I made. Like, imagine you have a giant wall-sized mural, and it's a lot obscured with sort of scattershot kind of overlay. It's not really an overlay, because in a painting there would still be the layer under, but in this case it's going to punch all the way through. Let's say it's shotguns instead of paint guns, and there's going to be parts that are obliterated, but unless you really run the slow, heavy algorithm to really tediously get rid of every sort of pixels is a metaphor, but something like whatever's the analogous to a pixel, it's like a byte probably, or bits, bytes, whatever. If you really want all of the bytes of the file to be pseudo-randomized in a way that it's no longer tenable for anyone to reconstruct the pattern that was there, you have to wait longer while the thing runs. But you can get relatively cheap or free software that will do this. And if you're not concerned about individual files, and you just sort of want to make sure that your machine, if you make sure you don't ever want to recover lost or hidden data off your computer, and you want to make sure that, because let's say you work in a sensitive area, or you're just, sensibly snowdenically paranoid, you can just run it, like people used to run defrag on, it's like a maintenance thing. So that'll just go, it's not going to choose a certain file to do this procedure, it's going to go through your entire storage volume and run, it would make sense to me to start with the cheaper, faster 3-pass, blah, blah, and run that because you can run it through your home machine without waiting for hours and days. And then maybe overnight or over some weekend where you're going away, you can run some iteration higher of a more robust scrub of the sort of the open space or the allocable space on your medium. So why am I belaboring this? Well, a digital computer is of course binary, and you can make analogies to networks of neural networks, true wetware neural networks, nervous systems, but analogies can be overdone and can be badly done or really inappropriately chosen. But in this case, I would say, what I'm really trying to get to is that the person that you were, like, first of all, it's kind of like the pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus said, you can never step in the same river twice. And of course that's arguable, but it's an interesting way of looking at things. So, it depends on your definition, right? But the point is that rivers are flowing, the molecules are changing and going like this, but there's a certain pattern. The river is really the pattern of flow, and that's going to fluctuate seasonally and blah, blah, blah. But you're, in some way of looking at it, every nanosecond, let's just make it easy, every nanosecond you become a different person because your gestalt neurological status is always fluctuating to some degree and is different from what it was 3 nanoseconds ago. Now, in practical terms, that's not really helpful. It's like, well, yeah, sure, in some way, in some theoretical way, I'm a different person than I was when I started the sentence. But that doesn't really cut the mustard. That doesn't get you very far. So, or cut the mustard seed. But, the way I look at it is, here's a simple way to look at it is, it's slightly stitious, is that, the Earth, of course, is revolving around this particular run-of-the-mill star. Well, it's actually not that run-of-the-mill, but it's size-wise, it's medium, something like that. At least in this, it's not that far from the median, okay? So it's not really medium in terms of an average because there are really super giant ones, so it skews the average. But anyway, we go around the sun, right? So there's seasons, and years are meaningful to us because people talk in terms of years because seasons repeat on a yearly cycle, and this is a version of the idea that time is a flat circle. It's very reductionist and not that useful of a picture, but it's a starting picture to say, okay, fine. In some way, every year is the same as the last, because at least on a solar calendar, you have the same holidays coming at the same time of year. Some years it's wetter or snower, colder or otherwise, but there's a cyclicality to it that's rooted obviously in physics and is, I think, psychologically reassuring, right? So just as we like to know that the sun's going to come up every 24 hours-ish, likewise, it's nice to know that Christmas is going to come around again, and there's a lot of stress with that, but it gives us structure. There's a built-in structure to human social life, including spiritual or religious life, or just cultural life, because of repeating patterns connect us in a way to the past, and they create a continuity between the future and the past, which is reassuring. Okay, I don't want to get on a tangent about climate change and all that, but fair point. But I mentioned it. Let's just name check it and keep going, keep moving on. Say, okay, fine. Let's leave that aside and say, so the year is a meaningful chunk of time, developmentally and and well, I would say the later in life, the longer you live, the faster time seems to go. So I don't want to jump all the way to decades, but I'm saying, like, if you live to 130, you're going to think thematic. If you look back on your life, and I'm imagining this, of course, but when you're 130, like, oh, well, that decade was like so, and this decade was like so, because, like, but 13 decades is not that many decades. But I'm just saying, like, it's going to tend to stretch out. So there's going to be probably a more stability of personality and lifestyle as compared to when you were 2, or 3, or whatever. So, and when you're younger, summer it's wonderfully eternal, right? And when you're in the moment all the time, you're playing outside with your friends, hopefully, doing whatever it is you're doing, but change is happening faster. So, in other words, if you want to think in terms of versions of you that are on a linear timeline, which is a very reasonable way to look at things. Not the only way, of course, but it's a reasonable way to look at things. I would say, it's a shorter segment. So when you're an infant, it's more like weeks or months. So versions of you that are sort of, and it's like a demography. You know how these demographers, it's a priestly class, basically. Not explicitly religious, but anthropologically speaking, we have a lot of priestly classes or castes, and they're not hereditary castes, not quite, but so caste should be reserved for hereditary systems, where it's like, oh, you're plebeian class, you're patrician class, or aristocratic, or you can have several versions that are stacked. Some of them, there might be parallel ones that are not, like, for instance, certain pools of priestly castes or skilled laborers, from an anthropological point of view, might be more or less, siblings in the same clade, C-L-A-D. So it's not always a hierarchical stack, but anyway. What I'm saying is, I'm trying to quantize a way of, I don't want it to ossify into dogma, but I do like to come up with coherent models that are easy to talk about, easy to explain, and easy to utilize for your own perspective and your own self-development processes or goals or whatever. So I would say, the easy way to say it is, it's an analytical, oh shit, I just missed my turn off. Well, almost. There it goes. Where's this guy? Okay. Alright, he makes it. Alright. So, so just think of that. There's a version of you for every year of life, and, maybe when you're older, it's like every 5 years. Let's say half decades. Okay, fine. So, but let's just stick with one per year. So for me, my center name, religiously and socially, is Vander. Okay? That's a recent development. I'm working on having that really feel like it's going to stick, like it's really going to feel legitimate. Because renaming yourself is a practice of questionable popularity, at least, and acceptability to others. And but you know what? When I'm meeting new people now, I'm increasingly introducing myself as Vander, and I'm trying to find ways of not violating my very literalistically, compulsively honest portion of my ethics, and not have to do the confession about how I derived it, why I derived it, why it's probably okay. Maybe it's okay for my family eventually because it's derived from my given names and blah, 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 blah. But sometimes I say Vander is David enough, or Dave enough, or I say Vander is my, I I'll say, I don't like to talk about my name, but my spirit animal is becoming Vander Raven Thunder Monkey. I like that joke. That's a good one. Is this thing still on? Okay, good. So let's just say I'm just going to artificially decide that I'm in my 55th year, so I'm 54 completed years old. And so there's 54 as a matter of analytical fiat, because if I'm a different person every day of the week or every minute, I'm just going to sort of imaginatively imagine that I'm not going to actually do the math, but to say that there's an average version of my whole psyche. So persona, that's basically the mask on the ego, which is not utterly false, but it is, very curated and very strategic for social integration purposes and blah blah blah, a lot of practical purposes. There's the ego, which is arguably the part of yourself that you're aware of, which is more than you generally share through your persona. Okay, the people that are closer to you in various forms of intimacy, in more intimate or close friendships, other relationships, they're probably aware of more of your psyche, some of it being conscious to you and some of it not being conscious to you. You know how parents and grandparents are very fond of saying, I know you better than you know yourself? They have a point, but every child, every person has things about their fantasy life or their hopes, their dreams, their petty little grudges that they can't let go of, that they keep to themselves. And so it's a little bit condescending. I was always irritated when I was told stuff like that, but it's not devoid of validity. So let's just say, okay, I have a 54 years. Let's ignore this developing stub of my 55th year and say, we'll set it aside for now. I just want to imagine that there's 54 iterations of my neurology's operating system. Okay? That, unlike a computer, look, trauma can cause memory gaps, but it's really not the same as a forensic computer erasure. So, in other words, it can leak. And I don't have memory gaps. I lose things a lot, but I don't. Anyway, so I've had a different average self every year of life. And from the outside, at least the way civilization is typically running and the way people expect, they don't really want to see much variation in your demeanor range because reasons. But internally, it feels like a slow journey. I'd be, off the top of my head, I'd be hard pressed to say, okay, when you were such and such age, how is it different than now? Well, I could pause a few seconds or, maybe tens of seconds, and I could come up with some, what I would do is I would scan memories of what I was doing at that age, where I was living, what was my job, what was going on, and then I could construct it, one by one. What was I like at age this, at age this, at age this? And I could build a stack. Let's say I could build a collection of dossiers. Anyone can do this. You don't have to, of course. But I think it might have merit as an avenue of self-exploration, which could be a solid foundation for a very intentional and hopefully pro-social and hopefully symbiotically pro-social, in other words, also selfish, self-development program or set of options, right? So I'm imagining compiling a collection of dossiers of sort of, David or Vander or David Andrew Saber version 34. That would be when I was 34, working on 35. Okay, you could number it otherwise, but that's easier to me. It's more intuitive. So haven't done this. I have not done that. And I'm not sure I want to, but, well, I tend to construe myself more in a circular way and less longitudinally. But the longitudinal point of view, well, it could be a worthwhile exercise. In fact, I think I want to do it. I want to start with a 1-page for each year and make it like a character sheet, like a D&D character sheet. And I'll have to do some theoretical work to come up with, okay, well, what are going to be the universal, quantifiable, or even qualifiable, but what are the spots in the database that need to get filled in? And that is a fraught exercise, because if you do that, you are building a wall around yourself, and you're cutting off basically infinity other ways of construing self, which strikes me as maybe not a wonderful idea always. But you know what? That's okay. You can always, how about this? Let's do it in pencil. So we can always come back and like actually change the paradigm or the rubric. There might be a different rubric when I'm in my 30s versus my 50s. But then you can always come back and do another round of abstraction and somehow, integrate or reconcile the different rubrics into what has become the more comprehensive rubric. That sounds like a solid procedure to me, because then what you'd end up with is a collection of dossiers, 1 page per year of life, that basically describes who you were, or at least, it's all hindsight and retrospect, but who were you in summary? Yes, you could include photos if you want. That's probably a good idea. But of course, you can easily fill the page with a collage and not have sort of graphable data. I'm nerdy like that, so I would like to end up with some graphable data. So you do this, and every year, you would start with the same sort of what's the word I want? I want a modifier for the word architecture. So it's sort of like a data capture architecture, or it's like a form in a database. But a form in a database, you'd need different fields, because you might come along the process and realize, the rubric I've used to fill out my character sheet is lacking some critical thing that I wasn't thinking about before. And now once I think of it, I can then decide, like, okay, is this something that I should project back all the way to the beginning and have it be null or undetermined or something like that as the data that's filled into that field? Or you just say, no, it didn't exist back then, and we're just going to leave it out. So as a database nerd, I wouldn't do that. That would drive me nuts. I would need to keep reconciling it to the latest and greatest, and over time, that's going to push you in the direction of more and more abstraction. Yeah, because, well, more experience brings a broader view of things, and you're going to start to see commonalities between phenomena that you might not have seen the first few times going through, whatever, some various styles of life challenge or whatever. Okay, so I want to do this. I want to do a little booklet of 1 page per year of life, like a character sheet. And you know what? I'm not going to focus on agility and constitution and stuff. There would be other factors that are more of interest to me from more of a psychological self-analysis point of view. And I expect what would happen, and also if I were to create this booklet and then keep adding to it every year of my life, I think that the part of the value of that could be that you start to have a mental picture that might be very hard to articulate and very hard to visualize, but something along the lines of what Terence McKenna and his friends called a morphogenetic field. So what is the shape of your psyche, sort of, is kind of what I'm trying to say. What is the shape of it? What is the flavor, the tone, the cadence? Or at least what is the repertoire that you're what is the demeanor variation range, and what are the constituent parts of that, and how are they different at this point in time, that point in time, that point in time. So you'll never get through this unless you start with the idea that imperfection of your model is a design principle. So don't fret that every model is arbitrary to some degree, every model of self is contingent to some degree, it's limited by the horizons of your perception. And I don't mean just visually, but horizons of perception is a very useful concept to me. I haven't talked about it in years, but it's been there in the background ever since I sort of copied or developed this concept. Well, it's a very important concept because I think the point of all this maybe is it could help you to start to see beyond, for your own sort of self-development or self-construal purposes, to start to intuit beyond your current horizons of perception, because you will have created some sort of a map of how the horizons of your perception and the demeanor range aspects of yourself and blah 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 have morphed over time. I'm going to avoid the word evolved for the moment because yes, people are adapting to their surroundings, but like evolution, I know the purists will tell you, that remind you that there's no thing to do with progress implied with evolution. All it is environment changes and natural selection causes certain traits and groups to persist because just by random luck they were better suited to some random environment change, like an asteroid hits the moon and it's not utter disaster, but it fucks things up in weird ways. Okay, and that could happen, I suppose. So, like, what if an asteroid or a comet came and knocked the moon out of our orbit and it just goes flying off some direction? What would that do to the Earth? Okay, the tides obviously would be affected. It wouldn't be good, I don't think. But I'm not certain it would be certain doom for all life. But, it's not a thing. I think we should have the world should have systems in place to be looking out for that kind of thing. And we can't be fucking around with dumb shit. Because we need to coordinate that kind of thing as a planet, really. And to not be fighting over space territory or whatever, but just saying, like, look, we need to put our best minds together, be transparent as we can, and have a better detection system that's more omnidirectional. So the horizontal direction is very high priority because essentially the plane, it's not a perfect plane, but the plane of our solar system, I think, is aligned to the plane of the Milky Way. Actually, I don't think so, because the Milky Way goes across the sky like this. That means the plane of the Milky Way is like this, and the Earth is rotating like this and going around the sun like this, and the Milky Way is like this. So in other words, I think that our solar system is at a serious tilt to the tilt of our galaxy. It might be wrong, but just thinking about the rough data that I talked about, I know the Milky Way is a band across the sky. I know that's the part that's toward the middle of the galaxy because that's where the starlight sources are more clustered, and therefore that's why it looks like a milky band. So it's not really milky, but So, all right, that's far afield from what I was talking about. So if you were to do this, or if I were to do this, I would have this booklet of tracking my journey, whether it's progressive or regressive or a mix, through life to date. And I feel that I could well start to develop some intuitive insights that can help me sort of be more ready for unexpected shifts of environment, which could be social environment or all sorts of aspects of environment. And to sort of just be more ready, to be more adaptable in ways that are wise and not just knee-jerk panic, right? And it could be interesting and fun to say, like, okay, well, here's how my personality morphogenetic portrait has gone through the vicissitudes of life, And so you might see cyclicality, you might not, or you might see some sort of a migration in some interesting direction. Some might be concerning, frankly. I'm leaving kind of physical, medical health out of it for now, but, it's of relevance, but to me it's not. I've been lucky about physical health for the most part, so I don't really want to get distracted with that, because it's a big can of worms, basically. So, mitochondria oftwithstanding. That's a joke. So, well, that's it, I guess. What would my character sheet look like, And then would I start to go like, okay, you know what? I've seen how this whole thing has kind of morphed, and so I feel like, you know what? I'm going to tweak the format of the character sheet. What's the schema of the database underlying? And it's going to be to me, a classic relational database. And in fact, I prefer flat files. I prefer big flat files with no dupes and no nulls. Dupes and nulls are the Scylla and Charybdis of a database artist. Yeah. And the bigger your data set gets, the more vexing that problem becomes. Just take my word for it. Or not, whatever. Do what you want. Alright, so, I don't know. What else can I say about it? I think I would start to say, like, well, okay, I want my imaginative degrees of freedom to be maximized. So, understanding that my rubric is something like a prison, because you're creating a structure that you're then, for your own self, at least, you're kind of universalizing it, and you're making it a dogma. You're ossifying some philosophy of self-construal into the best, most perfect dogma with just enough abstraction and just enough detail levels to be satisfying, to be emotionally satisfying. And I don't want to underplay the importance of that. It is important to feel like you've kind of got a grip on things. You've got a grip on your life trajectory. You've got a grip on who you are, who you've been, who you might become, who you want to become. And, but again, if it starts to feel too comprehensively perfect, beware, because you're basically cutting off further growth in the horizons of your perception. That's what dogmas. That's one of the unfortunate side effects of solid models that appear highly flexible and highly durable, is that those are mental traps. It's certainly the case. So, you can do it one way, you can wait for a season and then do it some entirely different way. Do it just through pure visual collage, or do it through playlists. Make a playlist for every year of life, as long or as short as you want, or a set of playlists. So I think it's valuable to keep going back and to keep going through almost like a breathing cycle of expanding and then differentiating out and reconflating or contracting back to different versions of core principles that summarize and might even cut across the playlist version, the photo collage version, maybe the video montage version, the paper and pencil, abstract, descriptive version. And I think it would make sense to, if you're going to do this. I started out very much with a very left-brained approach to it because that's easy and natural for me. But when I think about it, I'm like, well, a photo collage version for me might be a fun exercise, but it wouldn't be satisfying because it's so reductionist in a very particular way. Well, so is a playlist approach. So is here's the artworks that I did, right? So I'm an artist, but I'm not a consistently practicing artist. So, I don't know what else to say right now. it's fun. It's a nice idea, and you could build all of this into a physical archive, and if you had unlimited resources and AI assistants and whatnot, or what's that site called, Fiverr? You can get people to do stuff for $5 or $5 an hour. I just passed under an overpass of Dawson Drive, and that catches my eye because I happen to know that the etymology of that means son of David. That's what it means. And in fact, in Mandarin, the name David is rendered as Dawei. Okay, fine. Let's go back to what we were talking about. This is philosophical stuff, so it's kind of like, it might have been Socrates, who was it, that said, the unexamined life is not worth living. I certainly dispute that vigorously in a knee-jerk way, but it's not devoid of a merit as a point. Like, introspection and reflection is very enriching, and it can be very stressful, but it's enriching. It's a way of gaining wisdom and perspective on yourself, and it's almost like a way of getting outside of yourself. But when you get outside of yourself, what you've really done is expanded yourself. You've added an onion layer on purpose. I think that's probably a powerful thing to be able to do, and I think that's a good place to stop this talk. Good luck. Be cool. Okay, I'm going to throw. Okay, feel it, spiel it, then backtrack and heal it. That's one way of giving advice. Here's another one that's also a triple. Speak up. Also listen. Be decent. Okay, if we're in a Mad Max universe, that's my ethical book, right? You don't need a book. You can memorize it in 3 seconds. Okay, let's do one more. Because it's 3 sets of 3. That's nice and symmetrical. I could jump the shark and do the fourth one or the third one be a set of 4 or a set of 5 or 7 or something. But I would say, okay, fine. Here's something that I've nicknamed the Mejter, meaning medium-ish, but with a touch of magic connotation. The Mejter plan. So it's as follows. Plan isn't really the right word, but the Mejter rubric perhaps is: life is hard. Okay. Life is risky, misspelled with an E before the Y just because it's more childlike and fun. What were the other 3? Life is hard, life is risky. I can't remember something, and then keep adjusting was number 5. And then I had sort of a 5.5, which was sprinkle some sunshine. Okay, I wish I could remember it. Life is hard, life is risky. Pay attention was probably one of them. It's probably the third one. Life is hard, life is risky, pay attention. You know what, this is a substitute for the moment, but I'm going to say do your best and keep adjusting. That's not what I have on the original paper of that. It's not do your best, it's some other thing. But that's good enough for now. So, be well. Be as well as you can tolerate. Oh, one last thing. A very wise friend told me something that his wise father told him. That was wise in that moment, at least. Never be smarter, or at least avoid being smarter than you have to be in any given situation. That's it. Sayonara, big dog. Oh, is it not running? Oh, it's running. How do I shut this thing off?